Okay, let's talk about hard versus soft lighting. What are the characteristics of hard versus soft? How do we create hard versus soft? And why do we create hard and soft lighting? What benefits do we see out of them? When we're looking at the characteristics of hard versus soft lighting, the first thing we're going to look at is the highlights on the object itself. We're going to be shooting different types of objects, so they're going to have different highlights coming off of them, but here we can kind of see that where the light is hitting and reflecting directly back to the camera, they're going to be very hard, very what we call specular highlights. So they can tend to show like some deep ridges, etc., but they're going to be very overexposed looking highlights. Now in the background, this is where we're really going to be able to tell an easier difference for some people's eyes. The rule of thumb that I go by is if you could take a pen or a pencil and draw an outline around the form of the shadow, it's probably a hard lighting source that you're using. Conversely, if we wanted a soft lighting source, now for this I'm just going to simply move this light closer, and you'll notice that once the light gets really close, that outline, that hard shadow back there really dissipates, and now we can kind of tell that there are antlers back there, but they're so soft it's very difficult to tell the difference, to differentiate the outline there. And once again, I could not take a pen or pencil and draw an outline around that. It's simply too soft, because what's happening is the light is hitting the object and it's so close and so large that it's wrapping around the object and filling in the shadow back behind. And as I move back, the light does not have a chance to wrap around as much. It hits the object and then creates a shadow immediately behind it. That's one way you just saw that you can create hard versus soft, is by moving a light, closer or further away. The principle behind that idea is that if I move the light closer, what I'm really doing is I'm making the light source larger in relationship to the subject. If I move it further away, I'm making it smaller in relationship to the subject. So sometimes people will think that soft lighting is created by a softbox. Typically it's going to be true simply because a softbox will make a light source larger. But that does not mean that a softbox is always going to create soft light, and it doesn't mean that a small, what you would consider to be a hard light source, is always going to make hard light. It all depends on how big is the light source in relationship to the subject. So as you can see here, what I'm going to do is I have what's called a flag. It's just a diffusion screen here. Keep a close eye on the antlers of the subject there, and I'm going to put this diffusion screen in front of the light, but I'm going to put it right on the light. So you can still see a shadow back there. So I've diffused the light and I've made it just a little bit larger, and it's really softened those shadows up there. But now watch closely what happens as I pull that flag away from the light. And we see that shadow basically disappear, because I've made this light source much, much larger now than it was, and the light source is much larger than the object itself. So therefore the light can wrap around and fill in those shadows, and at this point we basically see no shadow at all. And as we move this in and out, we can see that difference, especially if I take the flag away. It's easy to think, well, you're diffusing the light. Well, that's true, but really what's happening to make it hard versus soft is I'm changing the size of the light source. And that's the basic idea there behind hard versus soft lighting. Just how big is your light source in relationship to the subject. So let's actually take a look and do a deep dive on these images to see what the differences really are. So here's our image with hard lighting we're going to do first. I'm going to change a few things here to get our soft lighting image. So whenever you do place a diffusion screen in front of your light, you want to make sure to adjust the power coming out of your flash. Okay, so we've got our soft light image. When we're looking at these, comparing the hard light to the soft light image, what you can notice here is that in that hard light image, we really talked about those hard shadows being back there, and really look on kind of the shoulder of the elk here, this object, we have a bunch of highlights that are kind of scattered, and they're very, very strong, what we would call specular highlights. But when we look and compare that to the soft light image, you can see that those highlights are much, much softer, much more diffused now. There might still be an area or two where it's close to being specular, but they're much softer, and we don't have that shadow in the background that's really distracting us quite so much. So when you kind of flip back and forth between the two images, you see really big differences. You know how much the background is illuminated, how deep and dark the shadow is, how much of the shadow do we see, how much of the highlights do we see on the object. And so you can start to kind of think to yourself, you know, when would I want to use this one lighting over another? Well, if you really wanted high contrast, if you wanted to make a product stand out from other products, if you wanted to give it, you know, more of kind of a hard-edged feeling, maybe you would use hard lighting. And you can see in the image that there is a lot of contrast in that image. If, however, you wanted to give a softer overall feeling and you wanted less contrast, then that's when you would go with more of a soft lighting type of a setup to try and soften those edges of not only the highlights but also the shadows. Sometimes you might give something a little bit more of a feminine feel if that's what you're going for, but overall it's going to soften that image up and reduce that contrast. So that's the basics of hard versus soft lighting. How you want to apply these techniques is going to depend on what type of an object you're shooting, what type of a feeling you're going for, but you can use those techniques to really make your image look the way you want it to look. So I hope you got a lot of insight out of this, and I hope it helps you in the future.